Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Giving the Game Away. I'm John with Ian, and today we're going to talk about a brief history of game monetization.
And we're going to have to try and keep it brief because we've written an
Could be a
article
long
about
one.
it. Yeah, we wrote an article about it, and it spanned two parts. So where this article came from is purely because we're going through so much change right now with the emergence of in-game, it being picked up by games like League of Legends, VR getting a massive influx of users, monetization on mobile, doing some crazy stuff. We kind of want to predict where we're going to end up, but in order to do that, you kind of need to know where you came from. So we actually end up right back in the age of the arcades. And I love the arcades. I didn't go when I was a kid, but I've been to a lot of them around London now, and they have such an amazing atmosphere. It's like going to a club, except clubs are scary. So it's a better version of a club. So it's great. They are these social experiences then. You see these groups of friends. I used to go and play Street Fighter with my friends. And that was very much the vibe back in the day as well. Rooms full of machines, people would flock there, people would play against each other. You obviously had to go out of your way. But they were these really fun, really simple experiences. And the arcades were highly profitable. They made a crazy amount of money, partly because they were on like the forefront of gaming, partly because they were genuinely fun. And because we're talking about the history of monetization, it goes without saying that each play was monetized. You would spend a quarter or 10p or however much per play, per set of lives. It was always small change, but it's something we'll revisit later, but it had a huge impact on the later version, the present of gaming. Did you?
So what period of time are you talking here when it really started to explode?
Yeah, the golden age of the arcade is around the 70s to the 90s. That's when it was like really skyrocketing up. You've got games before that, like obviously Pong was a thing, but we're talking the sort of golden age where
that was before people had actually access to those games at home.
Yeah, if you wanted to play a game, it was easier to go to a physical building that had games in than just switch on a TV and turn an Xbox or something like that.
And it's funny that if you fast forward to today, this is how the VR market has taken off. You know, it's the exact same thing repeats itself, just a couple of decades later.
It is. It's history absolutely repeats itself, especially on mobile. Like I think arcade and mobile have the closest history. We'll get onto that later, obviously. For now, we have to move out of the arcades because this is a whistle-stop tour. And move into the more complex games that started to enter people's homes. So we're talking about, not the Magnavox Odyssey or anything like that, because they were a bit too simple. Essentially, a Pong machine. We're talking like N64 era stuff like that. And obviously, it's probably quite reductionist to say games got more complex, so they moved into our homes. They sort of went hand in hand as technology advanced. But again, I don't need to tell you how these games are monetized because that's it's written in history. You would pay a premium price for the console, you'd pay a premium price for the game, and then you would just own those things. This was prior to the days of like hyper fast internet connections. So if you wanted to, if an update was needed to put out, you either had to get a new cartridge or in some cases, you could essentially record what sounded like horrible static, and that was software. It was a crazy age, but it was an expensive one. Like the gaming market was like making cartridges was expensive first of all, but the most popular machines back then, mostly Nintendo's offerings. Nintendo owns the entire production cycle, and they profit highly from that production cycle, but they didn't know how to price anything. So you'd have games going out for like £75, which is crazy.
It's probably the peak of game value, right? In terms of even after that in history, we haven't really recovered that level.
No, I mean we're sort of approaching it like games. You see AAA games releasing today for like £60, but that's mostly because the market is crazy right now, and inflation, and that's a whole other podcast. But this was really when the monetization strategy for video games changed, like on the whole. It went from pay per play to pay once, pay a lot once. But games were still social because it cost so much that you had to share them around, otherwise you just wouldn't play. And I that led right up to when I was a teenager. You were trading Xbox 360 games and stuff like that because they're still expensive. But that still shifted. So connection to the internet got more advanced, consoles got more advanced, and they were connected to the internet. So games started to become these mishmashes of modules. You wouldn't get a full game necessarily. You'd get 90% of a game, and you would download some more, or download content, or download cosmetics. The early cases of this, when they were first testing it out, you would be getting a full game initially, and they were just playing with like what could they charge. The most famous example is Oblivion's horse armor. Literally it's just armor for a horse. That's all it is. It doesn't really do that much. But they
laugh about that, but now with all the virtual goods and skins, and today it's literally dozens of billions of dollars that are being spent on these things. But at the time, it probably sounded very crazy.
It did. I mean, it's probably quite two-faced of me because at the time and even now I'm laughing about horse armor and how ridiculous it is. But I've bought skins in games like Smite. It's very much a thing, and it's easy to laugh at other people doing it. But when you do it yourself, you're just thinking, oh man, this is great. I just want this. But it did signal a change in the monetization strategy of an industry once again. This was also the era where you started to get fake currencies, premium currencies, Microsoft points being one of the first notable ones. We talk about the power of fake currencies in our other podcast, the psychology tricks used in games. But again, that's this is when they sort of started to realize we can make money from a game after it's sold. How can we maximize that? How can we use psychology to push that a little bit further? DLC and premium currency, huge way to do it. Of course, building big story content takes a lot of man hours, a lot of time, a lot of money. Didn't want to do that. Cosmetics became more of a focus. And on that note, it's probably a good idea to shimmy into the world of mobile games, and because they were just starting to come into the scene in 2008.
But I think the rise of the downloadable content is where the publishers and the whole market realized that there were different types of gamers, and that not everyone was participating in the game and enjoying the game in the same way. And obviously, monetization techniques are following customer behavior. And so if you have people who are willing to pay upfront, you can charge them upfront. But then they probably realized that by charging upfront, they were not capturing the whole market, because some people maybe wanted to try before they buy, and also some people maybe were willing to spend more than the £75 or £50. And so by having this kind of one price fits all, obviously they didn't really allow for that. And I think that's what from the very beginning mobile realized and did starting to do different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to strengthen that point, Oblivion is one of my favorite games of all time, and their DLC strategy was very much catered to just buy what you wanted to suit what you wanted, buy content if you wanted the content, buy horse armor if you wanted the horse armor, buy a house. It was very much like a build your own game in that sense. And yeah, exactly. It's a great segue into the mobile market, because in 2008, around the same time all of these DLC experiments were happening, the App Store came out, and not many games initially, but back in 2008, 80% of them were paid. They were premium purchases following the console model. You were owning the experience, you paid once, but the reality of the mobile market, it just doesn't fit that. The games were smaller because phones were limited. Mobile didn't attract gamers in the same way. Obviously, gamers bought them, but so did everyone. So did your mum and your grandma. They all had phones, so how could you get them to play games too? And the games changed to meet that. Obviously, you had to meet that custom behavior and monetize it. And that proved to be a challenge initially, but then Apple announced in 2009 the option to do in-app ads. Sorry, in-app purchases in 2009. 2010 was in-app ads. And these two things were a pivot point in the industry. They defined all the way up to the present of monetization. We don't really need to define either one, but we can say that today, because of those two monetization features, 4% of the apps on the Play Store are paid. People have massively moved into preferring a freemium model than just straight payments. In the early days, it was the Wild West, though. Obviously, the whole impetus behind starting Admix was because advertising had gotten to a point where it's intrusive and annoying and doesn't necessarily benefit gameplay. And this was no more true in the early days of these things than today. Like, no one knew how to advertise. Banner ads were incredibly common because they were easy to implement. They were distracting, but they were easy to implement. They made decent money. But it did get crazy. It got annoying and oppressive. But worth talking about in-app purchases here as well, because while ads are something we know about a lot, it's the in-app purchases on mobile are still a huge thing. They're now like $120 billion a year industry for the larger developers. And they make up, 70% of revenue for the more hardcore, mid-core to hardcore games on mobile? Which is, huge, even though about 2% of people actually buy in-app purchases. So not only is the monetization model changing, but consumer purchasing behavior is also changing, because while these in-app purchases are always an option, most people don't spend money. The ones that do often spend a lot. That's where this concept of a whale has come from. People who put just a crazy amount of money into a game, and they're still around. There are publishers who really actively pursue these whales. So there are even some publishers who will send physical letters to whales that are that play their games, just to build that relationship. So the monetization strategy has even gone beyond games in some ways.
Absolutely. And it's actually most free-to-play games, 80% of the revenue probably comes from less than 2% of the players. It's this power low to the extreme. And most of the mechanics in the game, the way they are designed, are to keep the whales spending. To, first of all, identify them. If you know that user is likely to spend a lot, you can also acquire a lot. You can also spend a lot to acquire them, And then it's about fostering the retention and making sure that you keep new content coming up so that they keep entertained, and they can also use all the mechanics, retention mechanics, social mechanics, to extract as much value as possible. But it's quite interesting to me that we, hearing about the story, we really are coming full circle to the days of the arcade, where you also had people spending all their pocket change and spending as much money as they had to play, which was kind of leveled up with the console, and then we are back into that model. So it's interesting to see that we actually went all around. So history has not only repeated itself in mobile games, at least, but history is continuing to repeat itself, because mobile games are now so popular. It's one of the most, I think, the second most popular gaming platform around, next to PC, in terms of pure player base. It's more. Yeah.
It's more. Yeah, there you go. It's now, you can't ignore mobile. You can't ignore the mobile gamers, on console at least, because they're a huge market in themselves. Mobile, even though it's not a mainstream serious gaming platform, is and will keep influencing consoles. So there's a huge amount of pressure on both sides. We'll talk about mobile first quickly. Because there are so many mobile gamers, you have to treat them well as a developer. Today, there are millions of apps and games on the App Store. If someone doesn't like the way they're treated in one game, they can just switch over to another free game. And it doesn't, no skin off their back. They're not trying to help someone they know. They have that power. They have the freedom of choice. And that's huge. It's absolutely huge. It's not something that consoles have in the same way because you're spending money on a game up front. And that basically means that the way you advertise to mobile game players has to change. Rewarded video ads became popular because they're user-friendly and nice. In-game ads are becoming more popular now because they're user-friendly and nice. And that is influencing the console market too, which I think it's time to talk about as well. So we've already spoken about how how history is repeating itself, and mobile is learning from the early days of the arcade. But the world of console is now learning from mobile, and we're returning once again to the age of the arcade, even on that like sacred ground of console gaming, which is always considered more hardcore and more serious. So first of all, needless to say, freemium has hit console, and it has hit console very hard. So Fortnite, breakaway successes on Xbox and PlayStation, huge. I think on Xbox, Fortnite was one of the major reasons they turned a huge profit in 2015, I think. So Fortnite alone, it's bringing in huge amounts of money. And even though it's big, it's not a mobile game. It's attracting serious players and more casual players, obviously not mobile casual. And their monetization strategy is obviously free to play initially, but with a huge amount of in-game purchases, in-app purchases. They've actually reached a 70% conversion rate, which is absolutely huge. It's
the industry average is about 2.5%. So it's way up there. But I think the fact that they also work cross-platform and have slightly different experiences, really tailored to the platform, enable them to really make the most of each platform and to capture the different type of gamers that are playing on these different platforms. So we mentioned, the console. Obviously, if you're willing to pay the money to have a console, you're a hardcore gamer, you will invest time, and you're happy to have a different experience that if you just download Fortnite on your mobile because you have a mobile and discover it from there. So they were able to tap into, from the very casual player to the very hardcore player, and monetize them and extract value from them in different manners along the way.
Yeah, and on that note, probably a good idea to talk about the battle pass, because that's something that's becoming really popular now. Battle passes are essentially a pay once thing, and it's sort of like a subscription to a progression in a game. So you pay once and then you get this growth system. It's in lots of games, lots of free-to-play games. But it's really telling that even though Fortnite is this modular game where you can buy what you want or nothing at all, people still crave progress. They still want to level up, and they still want to, progress throughout the game. And that's that option is interesting because it goes exactly back to what you were saying, Sam, about people want to buy the game they want now. They want to buy the modules that they care about, the cosmetics that they want, even the progression system that they want, instead of just buying all of it and interacting with some of it and not interacting with others.
Yeah, but also to make that work, that virtual economy, I can't stress enough how hard it is. It's not just having a game and selling random items and people are going to buy it. It just doesn't work like that. So to fine tune the economy, to give your users the right amount of resources so that they can afford the items, but not all of them. So they also feel like they might need to complete another level to be able to afford the next item. This is really hard to fine tune, and this requires a lot of people, a lot of economists, psychologists, people who really understand human behavior. And so Fortnite has obviously done an amazing job there. And now with all of the data that they can capture, they can further fine tune those algorithms. But yeah, if you're a small studio and thinking about building an economy, it's something that requires a ton of resources, a ton of data. And this is why a lot of the smaller studio end up reverting to pure advertising, because this is more of a plug and play format.
Yeah, I know the monetization designer as a job title is becoming more popular, because I think smaller studios are starting to realize how important an economy is, but also how hard it is to design one from scratch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you need a specific type of game for that. You need a game where you have enough retention, people are staying long enough, there is some meta game around the story so that it drives people back to it. The world of hyper casual, as we've talked about previously, obviously doesn't really lend itself very well to those type of monetization, because users are just playing casually to fill up their daily breaks in their lives, and as a result, they're not enough commitment from them to spend even a small amount of money. And that's also what's interesting about the whole gaming market. When you look at mobile, I remember browsing through the paid app section, and apps that are 49p or 79p almost sounds expensive. You're like, wow, I would never spend that. And it's a whole game behind it. So mobile really has commoditized content in a sense that we are all expecting it to be free. And anything that is not free, even if it's 29 cents, 49 cents, it feels premium. It really does. Which is crazy, because then we move to a different channel on the console, and we're spending hundreds or dozens of pounds for games and upgrades. So it's really, I think, that first barrier to entry, and this is what free-to-play game is doing so well, is that they are able to lure players and basically de-risk that experience for them. They don't have to pay up front. They have all the time in the world to start understanding what the game is. But then their first in-app purchase would probably be 3 times the price of the paid game itself. But it's really it's a psychology trick, right? They're really able to remove that mental barrier and get your users comfortable in a sense that they're happy to take their wallet out, and it's not just buying a game. They feel like they're buying something that contributes towards their goals. And I think this is also very similar to the motivation on the arcades, where you do all that progress, and if you don't put a coin very quickly, everything will be erased. So they play on that loss aversion pretty heavily, and a lot of people would just end up putting one more coin just to make sure that their progress wasn't lost. So a lot of these techniques have been used for a long time, but they've definitely been mastered by the publishers on mobile.
They really have. I mean, hopefully we move more into a try before you buy system, because getting demo disc with magazines and just playing them over and over again is such a fond memory of my childhood. But demos have sort of just disappeared and phased out as games have gotten bigger, which is a shame, I think.
I think it also helps with the discovery of the games, because if you have to commit upfront for 50 pounds, generally I guess you would hear it from your friends and maybe borrow the game from them, and if you really want it, you would buy it. But one of the reasons why the mobile app store exploded is because you can simply browse, and if you like something, you can download it and try it immediately. If you don't like it, you don't have to commit any type of finances to access the games. And so as a result, people are willing to try. We should look at the figures, but I mean, people have a lot more mobile apps on their phones, or at least download a lot more of them than they have of games that they have to pay for. And so as a result, they're likely to find things that they like and be recommended other things that are similar, and just discover games, share it with their friends. This is not something that can be done in a paid model. And I think this needs to change.
Yeah. So let's talk about the future of monetization quickly. So we've already spoken about the pitfalls of the current system. Ultimately, we've sort of got this weird divide between hyper casual players on mobile, essentially, and more hardcore players on console. But the reality is that gaming as a whole is becoming mainstream. There are hardcore gamers on mobile, there are casual gamers on console. So the two have to fuse a little bit. Ultimately, free-to-play is a dominant monetization strategy, and that, there's a lot to learn on a console basis from that. They currently are in games like Fortnite and stuff like that, but that needs to progress. So yeah, people who don't necessarily call themselves gamers will be moving to console just because one is in their house, or will try out a console because they're interested, thinking it's like a mobile experience, but then discovering it's not. Essentially, advertising and in-app purchases in games are such a huge success that they will be adopted more completely in the console experience. And we're probably going to see that in the next console generation coming up later this year, in fact.
100%. And look, like even hardcore gamers, they are willing to spend money on the games, but they like free stuff like everyone else. Yeah. And so if they have access to cheapest games or free games, and they could monetize these games in different ways, of course they would do it as well. It's a no-brainer, and Fortnite has proven that. So it's pretty clear that one of the current limitation of the console and the PC to a lesser extent is the business model. The business model prevents discovery. It prevents really true, not multiplayer, but the ability to share and to refer games to each other. And I think that's what mobile has done well. And I truly believe that the announcement of the in-app purchase, of the ability to advertise in-game, giving the game creators the ability to generate money from their contents in different ways, has been the only reason why mobile gaming has become so successful. Without that, you're limited to a paid model. And of course, hyper casual wouldn't exist. Most casual games wouldn't exist. I probably wouldn't be playing games simply because I'm not willing to pay up front when I don't know the game, but I'm very much willing to browse and try new things. And so I think, that really acted as an enabler and help the industry be where it is today. And it would be smart for more AAA, more premium consoles and gaming environments without, losing their roots and simply trying to appeal to casual gamers. That's not what it's about. But they could definitely broaden their market by also changing and starting to learn from what mobile has been so successful at doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Ultimately, advertising is so successful in the mobile space that console will and probably should consider adopting it and playing with it, because it's lucrative and doesn't necessarily have to ruin the game experience. I mean, that's really why console developers haven't played with advertising in the past. There's no good way.
Absolutely.
There's no good way to implement it on console without frustrating players.
Absolutely. And a lot of people think, companies like Admix would not work on AAA games because just look at the data. No one is using advertising in game. But this is the wrong way to look at it, right? You're looking at it because solution like ours did not exist. And yes, traditional advertising, interstitial banners at the bottom of the screen. Can you imagine a banner at the bottom of your TV? That just wouldn't work. But the ability to integrate product placement that are crafted by the game developer themselves. And so when you win a cup of, I don't know, a motocross game, it's a Red Bull sponsored cup. That just makes perfect sense. Or you can wear your favorite brand when you're actually putting a jacket on. So these are the things that we're thinking about. And I think over the next few years, we've seen already League of Legends adopting a mild version of that. And we're going to see a lot more of that in the future, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really, if we were to boil down our predictions for the future of monetization to just a couple of things, that would absolutely be one of them. Advertising will enter games more and more, console games, but not in a bad way. Console devs are so conscious of treating players well, as they should be, that they're not going to ruin an experience that they've worked very hard to craft without making sure that it's minimum discomfort for the players.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of giving the game developer the control over the advertising experience. You don't give it to the advertiser. you give it to the guy that has spent a year and a half crafting the game, and you can make damn sure that they are not going to ruin the game, because they love that game more than anyone. And so by giving them the tools to integrate sponsored content in the way that they want, you can make sure that they will put their users first and kind of self-regulate the whole process that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a guarantee that no developer is going to shoot themselves in the foot with something they've spent 3 years on. To draw a line under it, advertising will enter games more, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It will lead to a more profitable future for devs, which means that the industry as a whole will be able to progress and develop, and more developers will be able to support themselves doing what they do. And I'm excited to see what happens. It's an interesting time to be in this space.
Definitely is. And what's interesting as well is, just to finish off, is the way that virtual reality fits into all of that. Because if you look at, you had the arcades, then you had console, then you had mobile. The next thing that has already started, the next channel for games, and more generally the next computing platform, is spatial computing, is VR and AR. And you can see very, very similar data in the first few years in the store, where currently we have about 80% of apps on Steam or Oculus that are actually paid for, and very, very few are free to play. But very soon we're going to start to see a change there. As the audience become larger and less of the users are willing to pay, VR games are pretty expensive. Less and less people, as the audience become more mainstream, will be willing to pay. A larger proportion of people will expect free to play stuff. And this is where alternative solutions like Admix will be a lot more used by these developers, who realize that, wait, yes, I'm making more money because the market is growing, but the part not willing to pay is growing faster than the part that is willing to pay. And so, if you look at it in a decades, we will probably have 10%, 20% max of the apps that will be paid for. And game developers that are not embracing other business models will have a much smaller market to play with. And this is not crazy looking into a crystal ball type of thing. It's just looking exactly at what happened on mobile and just translating that curve a decade in the future. And so for me, it's pretty clear that every single platform, as they mature, need new business models, and pay on demand, in-app purchase, pay as much as you want, try before you buy, don't pay at all and get an advertiser to pay for you. All this stuff is always going to be valuable. I think this is not specific to any channel, but this is more specific to customer behavior. And so, it's interesting to see where, if the parallel between these two gaming platforms actually continue to evolve in this way.
Nice. Excellent point. VR is way too expensive right now.
It definitely is.
Interesting chat.
Great.
Awesome.
Well, thank you guys for following. Please follow us on all of our channels at Admix Play, and see you next week for another episode.